So I think all of you know me, but Allison, why don't you do a quick intro?
You bet. Allison Berry. I sit in Parker Poe's Charlotte office. We are a regional law firm from DC down to Atlanta. Um, we have about 350 attorneys, and we it's mainly a business law firm. Um, we started on our client experience journey about 7 or 8 months ago, and we recently have gone through the client journey maps internally, and we're going to start doing voice of the client very soon. So now I have to get people on board to be willing to have those conversations with their clients. So that's where we are.
Right?
I'm Caitlin Becker. I work at a top 200 accounting firm. We're based in Tucson, Arizona, though we have some other offices around. We started our client experience journey, I think, a little over 2 years ago now. But we've been doing kind of the VoC survey stuff for a little over a year. Um, and I am on my treadmill, which is why I'm moving. I sit most of the day because I have my accounting job, and then I also am a writer, so a lot of computer time. So
Yeah. I would do the treadmill if I could make it work with my big screen setup, but I can't get down to a small screen. So, all right, and then Abby.
All right. Hi, I'm Abby Humphrey. I work at CBiz, which is a large professional services, accounting and insurance, benefits and insurance company. And I we have a CX program. The company recently merged and acquired another business like a year and a half ago. So it was like the first full year now, or I guess the second full year of everything. So we're kind of integrating the pieces from the better formed CX program at the old company into this one. So my boss is fantastic, and I've been able to already hit the ground running working for her. And Ryan, I had a big win just today because I've been talking to one of our practitioners about sending an email to her clients to get us to do an interview for our key account management program. And she's just kind of been dragging her feet as one does when they get
Yeah,
nervous about somebody talking to their client for about 2 months. And she just sent it today. So I was really
great.
excited.
Nice, nice. Well, yeah. So, welcome everyone. This is my most practiced workshop. Voice of Client is, what I started Client Savvy to do 22 years ago. And now part of Clearly Rated. VoC is dead center on our strategic kind of product and priorities mindset. So I'm going to share with you just a lot of fundamentals on client listening, best practices, and best strategies. We're going to lean heavy on the digital voice of client because that's where most organizations go to do VoC at scale and make it measurable, repeatable, and accountable. As Abby was just saying, trying to get someone to make a phone call to a key account can, be a lot of work to chase those down. There certainly are many modalities of client listening and voice of client beyond electronic surveys, but electronic survey, we have a dedicated workshop in this series for doing client interviews because those have their own unique considerations. But voice of client electronically is one area where I've seen the majority of what we experience as customers isn't exemplary and in fact is contrary to what we found best practice in professional services. So what I'm hoping to do today is really give you a solid framework and understanding of how to do VoC with surveys in the context of professional services, where oftentimes if it's not done well, it falters and fails. So this is a workshop today to keep you safe in that regard. This is typically when I'm running this for an organization. Um, this is kind of a 7 to 8 hour deep dive. We're gonna speed run through in 2.5. So, any questions about the agenda and what we're going to do today? Nope. All right. So most of these CXMPs you guys have seen, there's not slides, or if there are, there's very few. We spend a lot of time in Mural, working on things interactively. Today is one of those days. I just have some stories and some myths and some best practices I want to run through. So I do have a deck today. So I'll kind of, move through this hopefully pretty quickly. And then we'll save probably the last hour for us to actually work on building a framework for a, VoC program. So you guys good with hopefully some conversational lecture here? Please interrupt and participate and don't let me just drone on.
Yes, for
Will you
sure.
send us the slides, Ryan?
Absolutely. And the slides are in the mural. Abby, this is your first session with us, right?
Second.
Second one. Okay.
So I am familiar with Mural now. Okay,
Right,
thank
right.
you.
Yep. So the slide deck is in the mural, so you'll have access to that. So let me ask you guys, have any of you ever taken a survey that made your life better? Oh, I see you're laughing. S-
I mean, not better, but sometimes it's a good way to blow off steam if you had a bad experience and you can tell them about it.
So there's a cathartic release sometimes, right? Yeah.
And I do like, I'll take occasional surveys when I have like good customer experience in like a store. So maybe it doesn't make my life better necessarily, but hopefully it makes the staff members' life better.
So sometimes, you just had such a spectacular experience that you want to pay it forward in some way.
Mhm.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's usually if it's either spectacular great or spectacular awful.
Right, right,
It's usually not if it's just what I expected,
right,
so that's and sometimes they become annoying when they are too much, right? Because you're like,
right,
I don't have anything to say that's different than the last time.
right.
So I don't know.
So it sounds like our collective lived experience is that surveys suck.
No, I think it can be helpful, like we said, but
I, I mean, you're being overly nice. The point of this slide is to say, yes, our lived experiences at surveys suck. Um, so if that's the case, why would we do that to our clients? And I strategically have this slide here at the beginning because I want us to step away from everything we think we know about surveys, and let's approach this with the beginner's mind. If we really are going to approach client experience with, one of the foundational tenets of CX, which is put the client at the middle of everything we do, we should design the survey for the client, not for us. All right, let's reframe. Let's design our voice of client program specifically for the client's benefit. And if we get some data out of it, great. And we can use that data, strategically, but what does that look like? Let me tell a story about in this case, it was an architecture firm, but I think you'll find it translates in multiple different industries. So I was down in Dallas working with the company, and we had just done their first baseline client perception study. There's a new client to us, first time working with them. So before we take on an engagement, we'll do this a baseline client perception study just to kind of understand the lay of the land. And then we'll spend 2 days really going through this workshop we're going to do in the next 2.5 hours of what is feedback, how does it work, and let's design and build a plan for executing VoC in your company. So it's a afternoon followed by a morning. We get to the end of day one, and I put the results of their baseline survey up on the screen, and we start talking through it. And we get to this one feedback response, and the client, all the scores were met expectations and higher, except for one question, and there was a score below met expectations on the project budget, but there was no comment there. So I asked the room, hey, uh, interesting feedback here. Uh, why do you think this a comment is below expectations? And the architect says, hey, you know what? I have no idea. Design is done, construction just started, walls began going up. We're on schedule, we're on budget. No idea why this client would have complained about the budget. It's like, well, oftentimes when you see a low score, but there's no comment that indicates the client is non-confrontational. So before you just call and confront this, you might want to email the client, let him know you heard the feedback and you want to talk about his concerns with the project budget. And the architect says, that sounds like sound advice, but there's something you don't know. He's my best friend. We went to high school together. I've known him 20 years. We won the project because I'm his best friend. So, okay, great. You know your buddy, give him a call. So I follow up with the architect a week later. I like hearing how these stories end. That's how I get my library of stories. I say, hey, did you talk to your buddy? He goes, yeah. What'd you find out? He goes, well, my buddy just got elected to a school board a year ago. This is his first big project as a member of the school board. And come to find out, he had no idea how to read a set of floor plans. And now that wall started going up, it didn't look like what he thought it was going to look like. And he was afraid if he said something, then there would be changes, and then there'd be change orders, and then the budget would get busted, and his first big project as a member of the school board would be a failure. It's like, oh, so what'd you do? Well, I met him on site. We walked through, saw what his concerns were. It's actually really trivial stuff. We were able to make some infield changes, keep the project on budget, keep it under scope, and keep the schedule on track as well. So let me ask you, is that a survey that made someone's life better?
Yep.
Right. So what had to happen to enable that story? What are some of the like subtle but important mechanics of that enabled that whole story to happen?
Yes, first is you had to uncover it, right? Like, didn't sound like it was something he would have said. It was
Yep.
otherwise.
Yep. What else had to happen to make that story work?
Well, your your client had to be open to contacting them and asking them and felt like
Hmm.
there was trust there that they could figure out.
Yep. What else? Would they have been able to go on, Abby?
This is very elementary, but even just having the survey in the first place, because if they weren't asking those questions, at least they had the survey to find out where there wasn't pressure to have that opinion that they weren't satisfied.
Exactly. Would the walls have been free to move after the school was done being built? Probably not, right? So there's some timing that had to happen. How did the architect know? This wasn't some generic survey coming from the corporate machine, right? So there's a lot of subtle pieces here in the story that make it work. And the reason why most surveys we take suck is there's no one behind it. When we respond, we're not like, there's no like plain and clear expectation that I'm going to be heard and that my concern will be addressed. And so when all those things are missing, it just becomes noise, right? So, yeah, the story reveals that important information about our clients is hidden. These are two best friends. They've known each other for 20 something years. That best friend was sitting on a concern and didn't say anything until asked. And even when asked, was real soft about what he said. And it kind of took some empathy and some digging to really uncover what was going on there. 93% of people are non-confrontational. Until the pain of living with the problem exceeds the pain of confronting the problem, we're going to continue to live with the problem. And our clients are the same way. If you're married or in a long-term relationship, go home tonight and tell your partner that challenging feedback you've been wanting to share. I saw that reaction in your faces, right? So it just goes to show oftentimes the closer the relationship, the harder it is to give and receive feedback. It's easy to rail at some anonymous, enterprise. Like when Delta screwed me on an international flight and cost me $7,000. Like, it's easy for me to like yell at Delta, right? Because I don't know anybody there. I just stopped shopping at Delta and now I fly American, like, okay, fine. But when my really close friend mechanic screwed up the installation of my engine and cost me $6,000 in a new engine, that's one of those sometimes you just kind of eat it because you got a relationship there and it's you don't want to jeopardize the relationship. And in professional services, that's what our businesses are built on. We have relationships with our clients. So the way we ask and how we ask is so much more nuanced. And ultimately, what we have to do is make it simple. We're going to go through some complexity today. But if at the end of the day, we can get it to where when one of your staff receives feedback from a client and they have this moment, like, oh, I see what you mean. Now that makes sense. Now I understand. They're never going to go back to the old way, right? That little dose of information they got from the client is just so crystal clear. It makes the old way look ridiculous. And so now we're just going to automatically be better. We're going to be better aligned with that client because we get these regular, simple doses of aha. And if that's what we can build at an enterprise level, client experience almost naturally takes care of itself. Yes, you should still do journey mapping and governance and, ICPs and all the other stuff we talk about. But if you can get the listening layer right as a operational discipline, you accrue the benefit of regular, distributed, incremental improvements happening all across the front lines of the enterprise. And in professional services, that's where most of your client experience lives. It's those interactions between your frontline employees and your clients. And if we're not developing them individually to be empathetic listener learners, all the rest of our CX work really falls short. Does that make sense? So when you start engaging front lines in something like VoC and there's metrics and there's scores and NPS and all this, that can create some real anxiety. So guys, I'm going to tell you, don't make VoC about the scores. It's not about the data. The scores don't matter. Now, I founded a company that helps clients send surveys and get scores. So the guy who founded that company is telling you the scores don't matter. And you probably don't believe me. So let's talk about that psychologically, about why that anchoring is important, and then I'm going to share some data points with you to prove it. The scores don't matter because feedback always tells you more about the client than it does about you. So Allison, if you have an attorney send a survey and his scores come back, really challenging, the scores aren't about the attorney. They're about the client. I've got three of you on the call right now, right? Is there one objective reality? All seeing the same slides? And if I were to get feedback from you about this session, am I going to get the same scores from everybody? No. So if I'm going to get different scores from all of you, what does that tell me? I'm doing the same thing. You're all perceiving it differently. So the scores tell me a lot more about you than they do about me. Now, certainly I can look at patterns, I can look at trends, I can learn from them and adapt. But if Abby, you said, man, that was 2.5 hours, that could have been like white paper and a 15-minute Q&A. And Allison, if you say, you gave us 2.5 hours, but you told us there was an 8-hour version, I really needed the full 8-hour version. You squeezed in too much. I could get that feedback from both of you, right? Now, what I learned from that is the next time Abby asks me a question, I better answer in 3 bullet points. And if Allison asks me a question and I answer in 3 bullet points, she's going to say, where's the 4 pages of backup and context? Because I really want to deeply understand this. right? So the feedback just helps me learn. Abby, you're a get to the point, keep it concise person. Allison, you want detail and context. I'm just making this up. I don't really know what your different vibes are, but that's how we can start to learn from this feedback. So we always just kind of reflect the feedback back to the giver. And that makes it psychologically safe to receive. It doesn't matter what feedback we get. It's just information about the client. Now, uh, let's prove it with some data. So here's a mid-size, a 50-person firm in Richmond, Virginia that we work with. We got a group of professionals here, and we see Chris at the top. We see Dan at the bottom. Just giving you a bit of context here about what we're looking at. So Chris is getting feedback, and our system 4.0 has met expectations. And so this dark blue bar for Chris shows that his average score is exceptional. The medium blue is 25th to 75th percentile. And since that goes all the way to the top, that means 75% of the scores Chris is receiving are exceptional. And not a single score below expectations. Now let's look at Dan down here at the bottom. Dan's average score is met expectations. 75% of his scores are at to just barely above expectations. Not a single score of exceptional. But also, there's no scores below expectations. Who's the better professional? Which one do you want to hire, Abby? Do you want to hire Chris or do you want to hire Dan? You got to pick one for your team. Who do you want?
Um, I don't, oh, I can pick between Chris and Dan.
Yep.
Taking Chris.
Why are you taking Chris?
Because look where that little dark blue bar is. I'm thinking about
Yeah.
this in terms of like doctors for my kid because she was just at the ER this weekend. So if I'm looking for that, I want the one that's got the most and the biggest number of highest ratings.
Okay. Is there anyone who would pick Dan over Chris? You guys know it's a trick question, right?
I'm going to play devil's advocate, Abby. Um,
Okay.
I'm just going to say I might, just because I feel like Ryan wants us to do this, I might pick Dan because he is maybe more consistent. It looks like Chris has kind of a wider array of feedback. So maybe you kind of know what to expect with Dan. I don't know. I'm just playing devil's advocate. I probably
There
would
you
have
go.
picked Chris too.
I love the way you're thinking.
I
What if
thought
we
Alice and I were going to be friends, but then she came at me. I mean, you have a good point, but then it's like, is he just like in that mediocre area and he's
That
really solid at being mediocre? You know, I don't
right.
know.
No, I get it.
do you feel like we don't have enough information to make a decision?
For sure.
Yeah.
I'm again thinking about doctors for my kid. I want to read all the reviews. I want to know
Right.
everything that happened to everybody who's willing to leave a review.
So what if we put their profitability of their portfolio of work on the screen?
Mm,
Hmm.
for sure. Yep.
All right. So Abby, are you rethinking your position?
Yeah, a little bit. Case closed.
What do you think is happening?
Um, well, Dan is obviously responsible for either more clients or bigger clients, and he's consistently performing, maybe not exceptionally, but he's meeting all the expectations for the clients he does have, and that's a lot when you're responsible for 38% of the revenue. So I think that's a pretty good sign.
And this is net profit, not percent of
Net
revenue. Yeah.
net profit.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think he's doing pretty well.
Well,
Yep.
what is
And
Chris doing?
maybe Chris is giving too much attention to people that aren't as profitable. So he's not prioritizing his time.
Yeah. So the reality is, Chris was working 60-hour weeks. He said yes to everything. He's never sending a bill for something out of scope, giving away the freebies, gold
He'd be a
plating.
great doctor.
Right, right. Um, and so not only is he burning out, killing himself, he's wearing out the firm. Now, Dan, on the other hand, you don't make 38% net profit without setting the bar really high, without setting really high expectations. So if you're setting high expectations, it's hard to exceed those expectations. And if you're asking for feedback measuring against expectations, meeting expectations shows you're perfectly aligned with the client. Dan is selling Cadillacs and delivering Cadillacs. Chris is selling Chevys and delivering Cadillacs. Right? So if you publish this and you start saying, hey, look, high scores are good, everyone be like Chris, what's everyone going to do? They're going to emulate Chris and margins are going to run into the ground. Right? So what this firm did, they showed this chart to Chris and Chris only. Like no one else saw this chart. Chris had an aha moment. Oh, my clients love me. I don't have to give it away. I can charge for it because I'm worth it. I don't have to write those hours off when someone asks for something out of scope. 6 months later, he's working 50-hour weeks instead of 60-hour weeks. He's making it to his kids' soccer games. His quality of life is going up, and he's running 17% profitability. Right? Meanwhile, Dan was asked to generate training for everybody on how to effectively manage scope, expectations, and pricing. So the guy with the lowest feedback scores, again, there's not a bunch in the red there below expectations. There's no problems. But he wasn't chasing scores. He was chasing aligned outcomes. So when you really start thinking about voice of client, don't make it about the scores. Let's think about the behaviors we're trying to incentivize and the outcomes we're trying to drive. And we want Dan level outcomes, right? Set the bar high, align with the bar, charge accordingly. Everybody walks away a winner. So when feedback comes in, no matter what the feedback is, this is the only question you can ask. And as you're rolling out, whether it's client interviews, client surveys, anything like that, this is so critical for your leaders to understand and embrace as they are coaching and supporting the front lines. No matter what a client says, we want to ask the question, interesting, I wonder why they said that. If you have a partner walk up to a staff accountant or an attorney and say, "Hey, got some a challenging feedback from a client here. What's going on? Tell me what happened." You can be as friendly as you want to be. You can be as supportive as you want to be, but you just asked a question that invites a defensive answer. Law firms especially, they're going to build a defense, right? I'll tell you what happened, and this is why I'm right and the client's wrong. So just tweak it a little bit. Why do you think the client said that? And if they start trying to build a defensive case, you say, I don't want to know what happened. I want to know why you think the client feels that way. So you redirect them towards curiosity and empathy. It's a really powerful transformation in how we approach coaching feedback. So one example is working with the firm. They got some, a tough feedback. All the scores on this one survey were really positive, and there was a challenging score on a scope and fee question. And the comment was, I didn't appreciate the $3,000 change order. And the principal in the room goes, what about the $50,000 in free work we didn't charge for? And the account manager on the account goes, well, it's a $5 million client. Of course, we're just going to write that off. So they start making all these plans of what to do with the feedback. And I say, hey, time out. Why do you think he complained about the $3,000 change order? And they didn't have an answer. So the principal called the client and said, hey, got your feedback. Looks like that change order is going to be problematic for you as a valued client. Of course, we're going to write that off. But can you help me understand why that was an issue? And the client apologized, said, I know it's my fault for asking you to do stuff out of scope, but you realize I'm at a public agency? Any changes to my budget have to go to the board for approval? Do you know how hard it is to get on the board's agenda for a $3,000 change order? That's what the problem was. And the client said, you know what? I know it's my fault. In our next contract, can you put an extra $100,000 in contingency so we never have to have this conversation again? I mean, is that a win? So those are the kinds of discoveries you make when you start reframing feedback to be, it's not about the numbers. It's what are the outcomes that we're after? And the outcomes are deeper understanding of our clients so we can get better aligned with what they care about. And sometimes, often that opens up real revenue and profit opportunities. People will pay for alignment and value. I'll skip that slide. The point of all these stories I've told is that surveys don't replace conversations. They start them. If you think about voice of client, particularly electronic surveys, surveys should start necessary conversations. That then leads us to survey design. Like, how many questions do we ask? Just enough to know when and where we need to have a conversation. Don't try to have the survey have the conversation for you, especially in professional services. Have you ever taken a survey, you get 82% done, and you answer a question, and all of a sudden you're 23% done because you answered it the wrong way? You get these like branching surveys, and you just go down a rabbit hole. It's like, if I'm hiring an attorney, I want to talk to an attorney, not a survey, right? If I'm working with an auditor on a big audit and I've got a concern, I just want to wave my hand and say, hey, look over here, pay attention. I don't want to talk to the survey. So when we really start thinking about this again from your client's perspective, what is the survey trying to do? Start a conversation. And that's where I love electronic feedback as a complement to interviews. Interviews are timely, they're expensive. It's hard to get people's attention to go do them. Surveys, you can go really broadly across your client base. And then based on the fringes of responses, the really high and the really low, that's where you can target some interviews to dig in. You don't have to focus so much on that a big bump in the middle because that's all the middle stuff. You want to know what's going on in the outliers. And then based on who doesn't respond to your electronic survey, you can target some additional interviews beyond that. So that really creates a nice blended voice of client approach. All right, so there's 5 keys in these stories I told to make voice of client work well. You guys are probably going to give me more than that, but there's 5 in particular I'm looking for you. Like really simple, basic stuff. I'm not looking for complex answers here. Like what are some of the mundane little details in these stories that made them work?
Ask open-ended questions.
Okay. What else?
I was gonna say even just like picking up the phone to make the call, like they took that extra step after a survey.
So following up, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. What else?
Just kind of like embracing the fact that you're going to maybe hear things that you don't want to hear, but it'll be better in the end.
Yeah. So the scores don't matter. The outcomes are what matter, right? What are the details in these stories made them work? This is important because this goes into the planning we're going to do the last hour today.
Actually taking action on their feedback.
Mm-hmm. Yep. What else?
I'd say communicating with them that you're taking action and implementing change based on the feedback.
Exactly right. So all of these stories work because feedback was collected early enough to impact the outcome for the client. This isn't after the engagement's over. These things all work because we're getting feedback early. Get feedback often. Feedback works best when it's not once a year, but it's an embedded part of how we operate as a business. If we're really trying to, again, most of the client experience your clients will encounter happens person to person with your professional staff. So if we're not developing our professional staff to become good, empathetic listeners, it's going to be really difficult to move the needle substantially on your client experience. We don't develop good empathetic listeners once a year. It needs to become a discipline that gets embedded in an ongoing basis. So we're listening often. We're involving the right people. Well, marketing or CX or operations or, something like one of you three can maybe get the survey out the door. You can't actually fix any of the issues with the clients. So who needs to be listening? Who needs to be following up? It's usually that service professional. We talked about not worrying about the scores and then following up instantly, not, next quarter. But you guys see these 5 points in the stories I told? All right. Are we all on board with these as some kind of anchoring foundations for designing a client listening program? Yeah, great. All right. So I'm gonna skip a couple here. Um, eh, I'll do this one. So when you start thinking about client listening, it's really easy to say, hey, at the end of the engagement, that's when we're going to get feedback. But what happens is unresolved issues tend to happen, during delivery, not after things are over. So this blue line here is kind of the perception of value. And your perception of value is often highest at the beginning of the engagement. And then it declines over the course of the engagement because those unresolved issues stay unresolved. And when are the biggest invoices typically due? Usually it's towards the end of the engagement. So any of those unresolved issues are just ammo for negotiating your final bill down. And that's where write-offs, markdowns, payment delays, all those things happen. Instead, if we look at the client journey, kickoff meetings, phases, deliverables, and we think about if we could insert feedback at those kind of key milestones, well, then we're finding those unresolved issues early, we're closing the loops and fixing them. Meanwhile, we're also discovering where we're getting great alignment and creating success with the client so we can keep doing what they love. So we do more of what they love, less of what they loathe. And by the time we get to the end, we've actually finished with a higher perception of value than when we started. And now payment comes faster, markdowns get lower. There's some real like business mechanics that work better when you think about feedback along the journey. Now, all of us have different kinds of engagements. Allison, I'm sure you've got attorneys that take a phone call, they draft a letter, and it's done, right? Like that's the service engagement. And then you probably have mergers, acquisitions, other stuff like that that could be months or years in duration, right?
Right.
Same thing, Caitlin and Abby, right? Tax return, simple tax return might just be done, and I send you my files, you give me the return, and that's kind of it. End of story. But then you have audits, you got SOC 2, you got all those other kinds of things that are months or years in duration as well. And those tend to be the higher value things. So as you think about the different kinds of engagements you do, some might only be available with the, all right, tax return's done. We're going to get some feedback because there's nowhere in the journey to, ask for feedback. But you still want to get something on how's our tax service doing. But some of those more advisory type services that are longer in duration, you can think about where do we create those milestones, those check-ins to orient and reorient along the journey. Are, are all of you seeing ways in your business that you can insert some feedback along the way?
I have a question. So let's
Yeah.
say for some of our biggest clients, we do lots of matters for them.
Yep.
So multiple things are happening throughout. So one matter might be in a kickoff where the other is in a key deliverable stage. And so when would you kind of have those conversations with that client that has these kind of multiple rolling projects happening at the same time?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's one I always get at this slide. So good one. And the answer really is it depends. And we have to disambiguate what we mean by the word client. So if your client is Bank of America, that's an entity, that's not a person. You could have, 15 matters going on with 15 different stakeholders at Bank of America, in which case, Bank of America is never going to get feedback fatigue. Individuals get feedback fatigue, not organizations. So if you've got, multiple different stakeholders on multiple different matters, that's actually not a problem because it's, kind of one person, one matter. You can work on it that way. In the situation where you have multiple overlapping matters with the same point of contact, then it becomes either an exercise of sampling. You know, this matter we're going to get feedback after kickoff. This matter will get feedback after a deliverable. Odds are, if you've got, 5 different matters going on and you ask for feedback on one of them, but their pain is really on another, they'll still use that as a mechanism to tell you. The other thing I've seen work when you have those just kind of ongoing programmatic clients is setting up like a quarterly check-in where it's once a quarter. How are things going overall on your matters? Our feedback platform that we have has a survey fatigue uh, setting built in, so you don't even have to manage it. You can just send the surveys and we'll manage whether they go to the client or not based on, you know, a timeout settings and things like that. So if you have a system, you can basically ignore survey fatigue because the system can manage that for you. Is it answering your question?
I think so.
What often happens with those kinds of accounts is there'll very often be a lot of small things going on. So maybe a quarterly check-in. And then if you have one or two really big matters, you run those through this more project-based approach. And so you
Mhm.
have you've got two, right? One or two big matters might get this milestone, and then you've got the
Okay.
quarterly kind of latent for the background for everything else.
Okay.
What we've seen is if you are closing feedback loops, which means when a client responds, you're actually following up with them and acknowledging the response, their participation is maximized when you're asking 6 to 8 times a year. And I've done 4 million of these now, so I've got the data. If the right person is asking at the right time and acting on the feedback, we actually train our clients. It's valuable to participate in surveys because they're going to get a response. Like, again, survey fatigue is only a thing if it looks and feels like a survey. If it looks and feels like a personal communication between a professional and the client, there's no survey fatigue. I mean, how often is too often to email your client about a matter? As long as the communications are valuable, it could be 4 times a day, right? So when you think about feedback as just another channel of matter or project communication, it's really hard to overdo it. Um, so uh, there's a lot of different scales out there. We invented this one called our client experience indicator. We did this for a lot of reasons. One, a net promoter is a top box bias score. What that means is anything less than a 9 or a 10 is kind of considered a failing grade, right? And uh, Caitlin, Abby, I know you guys are already doing surveys. What's your net promoter scores? Like 75, 80, somewhere in that range?
Yeah, I think so.
Allison, do you have a net promoter score yet?
No. Mm-mm.
So if 75 to 80%, or if your NPS is 75, 80, that means it's really, 3 to 7 points higher than that because you got to take out your detractors. That means 80, 90% of your clients are already raving fans. They're already promoters. So when 90% of your feedback is in the top box, how do you distinguish between actual continuous improvement and success versus just doing what you're supposed to do? No one hires second place. If I thought someone other than Parker Poe would be a better legal representation for me, I would go hire them instead of Parker Poe. Why did I hire Parker Poe? Because they're the best of the options available to me. So I'm going to hire Parker Poe. That means I have expectations that you're going to be the best. If I expected someone else to be better, I would have hired them. Now, oftentimes we make value decisions based on, cost and bill rates and all that, but that's all factored into my expectations. I've got different expectations of a Corolla than I do of a Ferrari, don't I? So if we ask around expectations, then all of a sudden, it gives us new ways of looking at data. And there's also this perception that we need to do anonymous, that clients won't be candid with me directly if their name is on it. But we've done some first-party research on this, where we uh, acted as an independent third party sending surveys on behalf using this scale. And look, only a tiny sliver came back with any challenging feedback, and that was just, barely in this acceptable range, and 12% included comments. But when a project manager or accountant or attorney sent the survey themselves, there was a threefold increase in challenging feedback and a fivefold increase in open-ended comments. So what does that tell us about anonymous feedback?
They don't find it valuable. They don't think anybody's listening, I guess.
Yeah. And, you know, if it's not coming from my attorney, then it's probably being driven by corporate. And if I complain about my attorney, then probably my attorney's boss is going to see this, and then they're going to talk to my attorney, and my attorney is going to sit down and look at me at my next meeting and be like, why the hell didn't you just tell me? Right? Psychologically, we don't like being a rat. We don't like being a tattletale. So the more your VoC program feels corporate and structured like that, rather than first person conversational, you're actually going to suppress the complaints and the free form comments. So the more we can engage our front lines in listening, the more actionable feedback we get. Why? Because clients want their person to take care of them. Now, that needs to be matched with something like this scale. The scale works because the most common low score is a 3.9. People just barely nudge it down. And, it still looks like it's there at met expectations. It's still above acceptable. But you know what? They moved it down. So there's zero ambiguity in what they're trying to communicate to us. So, the number of surveys I've seen come in where there's, 3.9 or a 3.5, and they're a 10 out of 10 on the NPS scale. It's like, you're the best. I would absolutely recommend you. But relative to that expectation, you came up a little bit short right here. So this really helps start some of those dialogues you wouldn't get otherwise. And those of you doing client interview programs, that's an amazing starting point to lead into an interview. Now you've got a little bit of data, you know where to probe to dig more in that interview. Any questions about that? Nope. I also encourage you to build your voice of client program the way your organization works externally. So don't just build it where like you as the CX managers are the ones getting the feedback and leaving everybody else out of the loop. Especially if you have external trade partners, that makes more sense in architecture, engineering, construction, very large, complex projects. Um, but you've got multiple lines of communication that happen today. You might have a staff accountant working with a staff accountant in the client organization, right? So they're working with each other on something. Today, without a feedback loop, if there's a complaint, who does that client staff accountant complain to? they're usually going to complain upwards. They're going to tell their boss. And when it gets loud enough, who does their boss talk to? It goes up the top. Well, then who does the CEO talk to? Talks to your CEO. And then it kind of flows back down. So this little friction point gets big enough, and now everybody thinks something's wrong. If we can institute listening down at the front lines, where now all of a sudden your frontline accountant can talk to their direct counterpart, find that problem early, fix it, the complaints never go up. But you've got visibility into it now internally. And so that visibility flows up inside. So, once a year when your CEO sits down with their CEO for a top to top conversation, your CEO can say, hey, look, here's the feedback your team gave my team over the course of the last year. Here's the 3 problems we found. Here's the corrective action we took to fix them. Meanwhile, here's 8 accolades of things we've done great for your organization. What else do we need to know? You can completely shift that whole perception management b b between the two organizations. So much regrettable churn where clients leave us and go somewhere else is because of friction points that happen down here. And if we don't build a voice of client program to activate the lowest levels of the organization, we're missing huge opportunities. So what we're going to build in the last hour today is a voice of client plan. So taking all of this, what do we want to measure? Project kickoff, matter closeout, whatever it is. Who sends it? Who does it go to? What's the timing? And then, what's your template number or ID for the set of questions you're going to use at that moment in time. So it shouldn't take more than a page to communicate your VoC program, but it can take a few hours of work to distill it down to the basics. And a lot of these, you might have really great ideas. Boy, it'd be amazing to ask, this person right after this happens. But if you don't have the systems in place to know when that happens and drive accountability and get the triggers, it can be a great idea that's impossible to execute. So what we're going to work on is that combination of strategically when's the best time to get feedback and operationally what can we actually implement based on the tools and data that we have today. Make sense? Like got a bunch of clients that would love to do feedback when we move from, phase 2 to phase 3 of a project. Like that would be the best time to get feedback. Well, great. Do you close out phase 2 in your ERP system to say phase 2 is done? It's like, no, because we still got to build time to it. So phase 2 opens, but phase 2 never closes. Right. And do you formally open phase 3? No, it's just a thing that's in there that we can build time to. So they want to get feedback at this moment, but there's no actual mechanism or trigger to identify this is when we've moved from phase 2 to phase 3. So then we have to fall back on something else. Like maybe, typically we go phase 2 to phase 3 when we're about 30% of contract value build. So maybe, that's something we can reliably track is when we hit 30% of billings to the contract. Any questions about that? No? All right. So we talked a lot about this, closing the feedback loops. I want to spend a little bit more time on that. The good news is if you can just get the feedback in the hands of the professional who needs it, they can't unhear the feedback. They will automatically be better. If Joe responds to a survey saying it takes you too long to return my voicemails, the next time I see a missed call from Joe on my phone, what am I going to do? I call him back a little bit sooner. Do I do that for all of my clients? Probably not. But I know for Joe, I need to. But if we take that next step and we actually close feedback loops and our a platform allows you to document when you've done that, it's fascinating. We've been able to measure when you document closing a feedback loop, you reduce your rate of repeat low scores from that client 83%, even on future engagements. So just the act of closing a feedback loop can get rid of 83% of your client complaints. If you need ammunition to sell voice of client to your front lines, This is a good one to start with. Would you like to get rid of 83% of your client problems? Yes, I would. Well, then we're going to put this listening layer in there, and all you got to do is when a client responds, just acknowledge their response. Just show them you're listening. And 83% of your client complaints are going to go away. When we get into survey design, we want to keep everything short, simple, and nuanced. 2 minutes is all you have. If it takes more than 2 minutes to answer a survey, people are going to leave. I said earlier, survey should be just long enough to identify when and where a conversation needs to happen, no longer. So that's, typically 6 to 8 questions. Our surveys on our platform have a 98% completion rate, which means 98% who start finish. And the more often you ask, the shorter your surveys have to be. You actually get more feedback asking fewer questions more often than longer surveys less often. So there was one firm I was working with, they were doing like a 28 question annual survey. You know how many answers they got to questions 20 through 28? I mean, not many people made it to the end. We switched over to doing quarterly and we broke it up into 4 smaller surveys. The response rates went up, their engagement rates overall went up, and they started actually getting data for the questions that were previously at the end because now they were the first 8 on the Q4 survey. So more frequent, shorter surveys are going to get you more data. If you're not at the point where you're ready to roll out, journey-based feedback at kind of key milestones on the project, you can still do the calendar approach and get towards continuous listening by being strategic with how you break things up. So one law firm we work with, they want to get to matter-based feedback, but they're just not there operationally yet. So every month, a third of their client list gets a survey. And then the next month in the quarter, the next third of the list gets the Q1 survey. Then the third month, the last third of their client list gets the quarterly survey. And so each quarter, the questions change. And they're not doing like a quarterly push where it feels like a snake swallowing the pig 4 times a year. They've got this monthly cadence of listening. It gets more towards that continuous operational voice of client, and attorneys just get used to feedback coming in on a regular basis.
And
It's not something.
is the reason why they're doing 1/3 of the clients each month during that quarter is because then the attorney can respond to that 1/3 of clients? Is it for more because of feedback responsiveness, or is it on the client's end?
It's much more to make it easier for the attorneys because now the attorneys aren't getting like once a quarter, there's this big thing
Right,
they have to do. They
right.
just kind of get
Monthly.
you to listening continuously.
Okay.
So it's a lot easier to not have a burstable workload on your
Mhm.
staff that way.
Okay.
Plus, it also means every month they've got a meaningful sample so they can spot trends, 2 months earlier than if they were doing it once a quarter. So from a data perspective, it's easier for them. From a workload perspective, it's easier for the attorneys. The only person it's a little bit of extra work for is the person running the program. But the way we set it up in our platform is they gave us the client list once, and we set each contact into their respective, first wave, second wave, third wave, and the whole thing is automated. So it just continuously operates automatically. All they have to do is when they get a new client or a client departs, they just do moves, adds, changes. So it's if you set that up, it's kind of automatic. You don't have to spend a lot of time administering it.
Okay.
Measure the right thing. It's not people and it's not the product. What connects the people and the product is process. So don't ask questions about your professionals and don't ask questions about the work product itself. Focus on the process that people use to create the product, because it's the people operating a process that creates the outcome or the product. So if we can, you know, we're probably not going to change the people. People are hard to change, but we need to change the outcome. So what connects the people to the product? It's the process in between. So if we ask process-based questions, that depersonalizes it. So the attorney or the accountant can receive the feedback in a way that doesn't destroy their ego. Even though we tell them the scores don't matter, we still need to make it psychologically safe. Because I can be who I am, and I can have a different process for you, Allison. Abby, I can have a different process for you. And Caitlin, I can have a different process for you. And I can still be me, right? But I can operate different processes as needed. Now, every now and then we might find a client that needs a process I just don't want to do or I'm not good at. And that's okay. We just find another Ryan who's maybe better at that process, and we can match up that Ryan with, that client, and everyone probably is happier. Right? So it's not about, oh, the low scores, you're not doing a good job. It's your process and the client's process aren't aligned. Do you want to adapt to the client's process, or do you want to move the client to someone who already has that process nailed? We're protecting the egos. In professional services, there's a lot of ego. May Accountants might be the most humble of the sectors I work with. Lawyers and architects are the two worst from an ego perspective. So, but we definitely need to be thoughtful around those things, like, the ego of the people we're doing this to. So, the 6 questions we found that clients most like answering are some relationship questions. How well do you engage me as a partner? How well do you communicate proactively? How well do you focus on my outcomes? And then you got to focus on some of the mechanics and deliverables. That's where a lot of process goes sideways. How well have you helped me manage the budget, manage the schedule? Are you doing the right things the right way? You can certainly evolve these. These 6 are a good core. Again, you can kind of go up to 8, maybe 9 or 10. And if you don't have like a, core brand promise or something like that, this is a really good starting point. If you do have a really clearly articulated brand promise, that might need to factor into the kinds of questions you ask. There's a construction company in San Antonio we work with. Their brand promise is amaze every client every time. That's, a really cool brand promise, right? But that means we need to measure, are we amazing? What does amaze mean to you? And are we delivering on that? So that became one of their anchor questions that shows up on all of their survey instruments, because that's a brand promise that they want to make sure they're delivering on. Make sense? All right. Do you guys have any like brand promise or like a, thing you uh, tell the world this is what we're great at that might need to show up in your survey instruments?
Yeah, our brand promise, we kind of like 4 tiers where it's enhancing your ability, making interactions easy, recognizing that success is personal, and impacting the community.
So those things are probably showing up in your VoC, right?
Mhm.
Allison, how about you? Does Parker Poe have any kind of service standards or brand promises, anything like that?
We do. Ours are 8. So I was just thinking, I'm like, I've only got 8 questions.
Right,
But we have kind of 8 tenets that we say are our client service excellence. That's how we define it, but in serving our clients and our colleagues.
right.
Is that what you mean? I actually have it in
Yeah,
front of me. It's funny, it was sitting on my desk. But it's understand your industry and business, provide regular and meaningful communications, quality legal counsel, of course, providing value. We tailor our service to you, the client, avoid surprises, hear when you need us, and collaborate seamlessly to provide a one firm approach.
yeah. So there was definitely a proactive in there. There was a partnering in
Mhm.
there. There was an
Okay.
outcomes in there.
Okay.
Um, so your words might be a little bit different but you're covering a lot of these same themes.
Okay,
So,
themes. Okay.
um, if you were using my platform, I might encourage you to stay closer to these stock ones because then you can get benchmarking against what your peers are doing in these stock ones.
Okay.
But if there when you need us is really a brand promise, that might replace schedule. And so you lose some benchmarking because you're trying to communicate your brand standards and brand promise. So those are always some of the trade-offs when you're choosing what questions do we ask. If you want to do benchmarking, you might have to make yours a little more, I don't want to say generic, but just a little bit more aligned with what your peers are doing for benchmarking. If you're more focused on communicating a brand promise and measuring, are we aligning to that brand promise, then benchmarking doesn't matter anyway. So
Okay.
those are just some of those decisions you make as you think through. Now, I love that you already have 8 themes because if those are the 8 themes, now when we start thinking about when are we getting feedback, whether it's, quarterly or whether we're doing it, mid-matter, your questions are already half written. You've got the 8 themes. Now you know what questions to write. So when you say a timely and relevant communication, that question might be different after a kickoff meeting versus mid-matter versus you're doing an annual check-in, right? So you start thinking about this is the theme we want. This is when we're asking. Now you've got the architecture of what you need to craft the question.
Okay.
And if you are going to measure multiple times, whether it's, based on calendar or based on somewhere in the client journey, there's great opportunities when you have consistency with the themes. So the question might change, beginning, middle, end. But if it's about partnering, like a kickoff call, you might ask, how well did we explain how we're going to partner with you on this matter? Middle of the journey, how well are we partnering with you on this matter? At the end, how well did we demonstrate our partnership through this matter? That's a really generic example. Those aren't like great questions, but just wanted to give you a generic example of how you might use the same theme, but then ask timely questions based on where the client is in their journey.
Okay.
Okay. Um, we talked about this already a little bit. Kind of coming back to this a client experience indicator and what value it brings in addition to something like Net Promoter. Anytime someone changes this off of 4.0, so every question is already pre-answered, met expectations. So anytime someone changes it, they're showing you there's a gap between what was expected and what was perceived. Now that gap is often usually positive. So that's where you start running into that Chris situation. Is someone over delivering? Are they gold plating? Are they saying yes to everything? Are they giving away free hours? It's really easy to buy high scores. High scores aren't necessarily good scores. They're only good if you're converting that value creation into value capture, right? So we really should be thinking about voice of client systems as measuring where we've created value and then how do we capture value. Too often we think about voice of client as we're just looking for the negative gaps so we can salvage value before it runs away. But for every problem below expectations, there's 5 successes you don't know about. And an NPS alone doesn't give you those insights. So, however you go about doing this, make sure you find a way to really identify those exceptional moments because that's where some value is created. And you want to have a playbook in place organizationally. When we've created value, how do we go about value capture? Can we get a referral? Can we, increase our fees? Can we stop writing off hours that we're not billing just to make the client smile because they've told us we've earned it? Abby, I saw you smile, so that's something you've seen happen.
Um, yeah, it just needs to be like authentic too. So I mean, I just kind of laugh about some of this because this client just responded to me that yes, they're going to do the interview and they want two other people from their team to do it. So I'm pre-freaking out for that now. Um, but as I'm listening to this too, Ryan, you know more about this about how, and Caitlin, you heard me say this last time, the company I'm at acquired another one and they had like a really strong set of value and value statements for their CX program. And so we're using like the mechanics of that program, like the survey, the key account
Yep.
management. But one thing that I think I'm going to be working on this year, it's kind of like I put the cart before the horse. So now I have to back up and kind of come up with some of those like CX standards. But I just think it's funny because you have to have these things in place so it makes sense to your practitioners too, like the front lines.
Yep. All
Sometimes it feels
right.
backwards.
Um, so there's this perception that the more we exceed expectations, the more loyalty we get. That's what this dotted line shows. But looking at actual customer behavior, once you hit meeting expectations, there's very little additional loyalty you can get. I mean, once someone's loyal to you, how much more can they give you? So there is a diminishing return on exceeding expectations. And that's, a lot of these things I'm talking about might seem a little counterintuitive, but there's kind of magic to getting into perfect alignment with the client without going too far over. I like to say met expectations plus 1% is perfect delivery. And if you start seeing scores up here in this exceptional range, you should start elevating the expectations in the marketplace. You should communicate, here's what we're actually delivering. Here's the value you can expect. Your prices should follow, right? As you elevate expectations in the market, your prices should follow. You've created a premium brand experience. Now go do the premium price with it. And every time you do that, because you've elevated the expectations, the same performance is going to result in scores closer to the median. Does that make sense? And unlike um, Net Promoter is a logarithmic curve. You get better and better and better until you just can't get any better anymore. Once your NPS hits 75, 80, it's really hard to go anywhere. So how do you measure continuous improvement once your Net Promoter score is 75 and 80? Whereas measuring expectations, you set the bar high, you deliver to it, the scores are going to start to come down. Well, the next time you innovate, you're going to see those scores jump up. You just did something new, unexpected, that exceeded my expectations. You show that you just created some value. You start finding ways to capture that value. You set that as a new standard, and the scores are going to come down. So it becomes this self-adjusting, continuous improvement mechanism that Net Promoter alone doesn't give you. So I like to say NPS is kind of like the destination on a map, and CXI is your turn-by-turn directions. It tells you how to get to where you want to go. So as we wrap up here, any questions? This is usually like 3 hours, and we did it in an hour. So you guys did well.
I always have lots of questions, but usually when we go through the exercise, it kind of works its way out. So it's almost like I don't have the right questions to ask,
Yeah.
if that makes
All right.
sense. Usually they surface and I figure it out as we do the exercise.
Good, good. So yeah, you know, as you think about planning out your VoC program, you're certainly going to want to look for a project or matter or engagement trends to identify and resolve problems early, to eliminate wasted effort. You're going to want to find client trends. Who are the best clients? How do we match the right staff to the right client? All that data shows up in there as well. And you also want to think about what are some of the firm-wide trends that you want to be able to manage and pull from the data. So can you identify strategic improvements? Can you market your discovered strengths? One of the things I love doing is taking feedback from new clients' first perception study, finding the themes in it, and then comparing it to your website. Does your website say you're something that your clients don't say? Do your clients say something about you that your website doesn't? You might discover there's three really strong strengths your clients love about you, and you're not communicating that to the marketplace. So if what clients love most about you isn't being communicated in the marketplace, how can new buyers choose you for those things? So, you really start thinking about that data systematically. And what do we want this to do for us at an enterprise level? But if you start there and you ignore this, frontline project matter engagement level feedback, you're never going to get to that firm-wide stuff because we're not really engaging true feedback where it's happening inside the organization. So that's why I took you on that journey today. Start where the work is happening, measure there, and then you can roll it up into a client and firm trends. All right. Yeah. So do you guys feel like I missed anything? I know I moved really fast. Do you feel like I missed anything before we go into the exercise?
I don't think so.
Let's see. So share, I need to share the screen, and I also need to share the link with you guys. Put this in the chat. All right. And for those of you who have used Mural before, they just released a change. You now have to press down the space bar when you click to move the screen around. So just a fun little note of navigation. Been driving me nuts all day today. It's my first time in Mural since the change, and I'm so used to just clicking and dragging. So, so I'm going to walk us through 3 steps, and then I'm going to do what we often do. We'll take a somewhat longer break. And if you want to get started on the longest part of the exercise, you can start working on that. And if we can wrap up early today, that'd be great. If not, we'll stick all the way through to 5 o'clock. But I know everyone's busy, so if you want a little bit of time back, we can push through. So I want us to really work in 3 spots right now. So the CMOT brainstorm, CMOT is short for critical moment of truth. So the critical moment of truth is that moment in time when a client's sentiment can rapidly change from one thing to another. So give me something. What?
Sorry, I was trying to mute. I sneezed.
Oh, okay. I thought I heard a sneeze, but you came off mute for it. So, um, what are some times in your client's journey when their sentiment can rapidly change from one thing to another?
Like when they get the final bill,
When they get the
right? Like,
final bill and there's maybe an unexpected charge on it, or it's, not what they thought.
We're the first bill, the first time they get a bill from us.
First time you get a bill, that can create a rapid change in sentiment. What else?
um, if they ask you a question and don't get a timely response,
So, waiting.
Maybe a deliverable was provided to them that wasn't up to their standards,
Subpar
or just
deliverable.
something wrong.
Yep. Maybe they failed an audit.
Mhm.
All right. Maybe they won a case. Maybe they lost a case. Right. These are all moments where emotions really happen.
Mhm.
So when emotions happen, that's the best time to get some feedback. Now, some of these are pretty straightforward. First invoice. Do we have a system of record that tells us when a first invoice goes out for the first time?
Most of our billing is done monthly, so yes.
So we have systems to know when a first invoice goes out, right?
Mhm.
Do we have systems to know when a final bill went out?
Yes.
I hear some yeses. That one's a lot fuzzier. A lot of times people don't know when it's actually over. There might not be a formal closeout process, or the final bill might happen 6 months after work actually finished, right? First invoice is one of the easiest ones you can tie a survey to. Final bill, still somewhat reliable, but your mileage may vary. How do you know when a client is frustrated because they're waiting on a response from somebody,
Harder to define.
right? Do you have a system that tracks when deliverables are delivered? So Katie, you've got a, final report system or something like that where you can track when.
Yeah, we have a workflow system that tracks where like returns and financials are in the process.
Great. So you've got a system of record that tracks deliverables, which means you can tie measurement to steps in the workflow. Abby, if you don't have a workflow management system, then that's going to be a really hard one to sync feedback to deliverables because there might not be a system in place.
Yeah, I'm sure we do. It's just not something that marketing has access to, which sometimes there's a disparity between the practitioners and the knowledge that we have. I think another CMOT would be onboarding because that can leave a really good or bad taste in somebody's mouth right away.
Yeah.
Yep.
And onboarding might have multiple steps. Might be after first meeting, might be, how long does onboarding take? Is it a 60-day process? Is it a 90-day process?
And
Sometimes
going,
you can, what?
no, keep going. I'll build on it in a second.
I was going to say, you can often avert survey fatigue with open communication. Hey, we know these next 60 days, a lot's going to happen, and we can get off sync really quickly. So we're going to check in, after kickoff in 30 days and at 60 days to make sure your onboarding experience is perfectly aligned. Is that okay? You can negotiate access and break some of the feedback rules or fatigue rules because you're kind of in the fire and we're all going to agree we're going to measure more often while we're in the fire. And then we're going to move to something, more paced out because we're not in the thick of it.
Where I was going to build on is particularly in legal conflicts is a big place where, we can't represent both sides of a matter, or there might be business conflicts, right? That they just, Home Depot doesn't ever want us representing Lowe's,
Right.
just because of their head-to-head competitors type thing.
Yep.
So
Yep.
our conflicts process can be a stressful point because they're just ready to hire somebody because they have an issue, but we're on the inside trying to figure out if we can
Can we?
actually do it. Right.
Yeah. 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 Great. So who are some of the stakeholders we might need to get feedback from? We don't, um, I'm just getting the conversation started. So when we start building out a feedback plan, you've got some ideas of what kind of CMOTs you might want to measure. Who do we want to get feedback from? Let's think about the potential stakeholder group. And this is usually simpler in legal and accounting than it is in AEC, but I still want to address this.
Um, the account manager.
So this is who we want to get feedback from. So inside the,
Oh, who we want to get from?
yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, for us it depends. The deliverable recipient might be different like than the signer or decision maker. So it kind of really just depends.
Yep.
In legal, it could be the general counsel or legal operations, or it could be like HR directors if they don't have in-house counsel. Could be real estate. If it's like a transaction type thing, it could be a real estate or other deal executive.
All right. So you start thinking about all the different people you could be working with, and that starts, maybe the final bill, when the final bill happens, that's when we want to get feedback from the decision maker. But when we're focused on deliverables, we want to get it from the deliverable recipient. So that's often how we can, again, get around some fatigue rules. Because again, organizations don't get fatigue, people do. So you might be able to get a lot more feedback from the organization if you're targeting different stakeholders at different points in the journey. And then you also want to think about your engagement types. Your feedback plan is going to be very different for tax versus something like audit. So um, we don't have to like go deep into that one right here, but think about you might need to adapt your voice of client plan. So for this kind of project, here's what we do. For this kind of project, here's what we do. For this kind of engagement, here's what we do. Now, what I recommend usually is trying to simplify. So this next phase, when I'm doing this with an organization, is usually a 3 or 4 hours of work because we add a whole bunch of complexity and then we start simplifying. So don't be afraid to add some complexity and then distill. If you try to get to simple on the first try, oftentimes that's hard. So from a thought process, it's usually easier to just let some complexity happen. Then you look at your VoC plan and you say, where do we have overlap? And you might find out we can do the same set of questions after a tax return as you do at an audit closeout because both of them are done. And if we write the questions broad enough, we can use the same instrument on both. And maybe a tax return, we only do a closeout survey, but an audit, we might do a kickoff, a mid audit, and a closeout. Does that make sense? So we can really start thinking through how do we handle that complexity while still keeping some nuance in the process. So we're 90 minutes in. I'm gonna put us on a 15 to 20 minute break. So let's come back at 3:45 Eastern. And if you want to work on this, you can in the interim. If not, totally fine. But double click up here, maybe put your name on it, right? Ryan, and I'm going to do project kickoff. So that's my moment. Well, who's the sender? Well, this might be the project manager. Who presses send? And this might be automated when new project number is created in ERP. Who does it go to? Kick off attendees. What's the trigger? We already said new number issued, wait 30 days because sometimes there's a delay between when the number is created and the kickoff happens. What's our trigger source? It's coming from ERP. What's the accountability? Well, since it's automated, I don't have to really drive accountability. But if you have something that you can't automate, you might need to drive some accountability. So if a survey has to be manually sent because we have no automated triggers, how are we going to make sure that survey is being sent? And then are there any other special notes that we might want to have in this? So kind of build out a column. I'd love for each of you to walk out of here today with at least one well thought out survey that we've kind of pressure tested. Do we know who the sender is? How it actually gets sent out the door? Who is it going to? Where does that list live? Maybe it's no list of kickoff attendees exists today. Use key contact field to start. Work with IT to add additional fields in ERP by Q3, right? So if you find a gap, what's your plan to make it work today? And then what's our desired future state? Are there any questions about how to build out this feedback plan? Yep.
We can all pick a different spot in the process. Is that what you're saying?
Yep, yep. So
Okay,
just so there's yours, Allison, and you can
okay,
just build one out here.
okay.
Okay, and then we'll
Got it.
we'll reconnect at we'll call it 3:48 now, since I took 3 minutes explaining. So 3:48. I'll give you guys 15 minutes, and we'll
Okay.
get back at it.
Thank you.
Hey everyone. Well, I see Allison here working. Caitlin, Allison, Abby, you guys here? There's Caitlin. There's Abby.
Okay.
All right. I saw Allison in here moving around, so I think she's here too, just off camera still. All right.
Yep. Sorry about that.
No worries. So Abby, why don't you take us through? Looks like you and Allison have some pretty similar th thoughts here.
Yeah, so Ryan, feel free to tell me if I didn't do this correctly. I think I was following along though, and I'm trying to think of the role I actually
Hmm.
play in sending surveys and interacting with our clients. And so for some of our service lines, we do semi-annual client satisfaction surveys. So we send them out twice a year. There's other ones that only go out once a year, and there's some that go out every month to different sets of clients. But for the ones that go out twice a year, um, that's what we do is we just know they're going to go out twice a year. The sender, it's always has the account manager's name on it, so it doesn't look like it's just coming from CBiz. We try to have some personal element to it. Um, who presses send? It's something that our CX team goes into and schedules to send from the platform automatically, so it's not dependent on the account managers. Um, to whom? So it's the client list that each service line provides, but there's specific like criteria or parameters around it. For a lot of them, we do a revenue threshold. And then the trigger, I'm hope I didn't get tripped up on this. So it depends on the service line. Some are scheduled out based on renewals. So CBiz again does accounting and then they do benefits and insurance. A lot of my CX experience right now is more with the benefits and insurance side because they've been more open to us reaching out to their clients. So um some of it is based on the renewals for when those things are
Right.
coming up, and then some, like for the financial services side, go out during non-busy season. So we try to always hit clients at the right time. Like we do
Right.
consider timing. Trigger source. Um, this I'm not sure I got correctly, but the databases are maintained by each service line. Um, so I can't pull the client lists, but I can go in and schedule it in the survey platform.
Right. Right. So each service line has to update the list. Right.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's something we're working on overhauling. But I laugh. I feel like everything I'm doing is like we're working on it, we're working on it. But
Right.
it's been a big company coming together.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So we're still not there, but we're getting
Right.
there. We're trying to condense and limit the number of databases we have. And then accountability. So the survey platform has workflows in it. So when responses come in, some service lines want their account managers and like the operations people to receive every single um, response that comes in. Some only want them if they're negative. And some surveys have questions like if they want to learn about additional services we have. So then there can be separate workflows for some of those. So people are
Right.
always notified automatically. So it doesn't fall on us as a CX team, and it doesn't fall on that account manager to seek that information out from us. It's already just going to them.
Right. Good. Good. Katie, looks like you've got one here.
Yep. So our firm is kind of adjusting our onboarding process. It was very siloed depending on what service we were providing. And so with our continued implementation of HubSpot, we are starting to kind of figure out how everything is going to be driven through that platform from both like the back end of doing everything, like we're going to automate a lot of stuff and use APIs to connect to our different software, but also from the client facing portion. So because we're starting to focus on that, I really do want to send a survey after the onboarding process occurs. So the sender would be, we call them at our firm relationship managers. So that is like the main accountant who's going to be interacting with this client. Fingers crossed we can get this survey automated. So no one will have to really do it. It'll just be driven by our workflow system. It'll go to the main point of contact at the client. So this could be the COO, the finance director, the CEO, could be pretty much anyone. It really just depends. The trigger would be after the onboarding kickoff meeting. So we're hoping to kind of formalize like a very uh like a kickoff meeting where it kind of goes through our technology, it goes through the engagement letter, goes through everything like that. Again, movement in the workflow program would hopefully be the trigger source. And then the workflow should reflect that the survey's been sent, but we could have our project managers who I hate that we call them project managers, but they are the people who like directly assist relationship managers. We can have them kind of monitoring follow up because they are the ones that kind of are facilitating conversations with the clients when it comes to, getting their documents, when it comes to, sending the tax return. So they're kind of the middleman for the relationship. I want to rename them the client relationship something like I don't
Yeah.
know. Like I know some people call them like concierges, client success managers. That's what that was, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So that would be that ideal process.
So the the trigger you have after the onboarding kickoff meeting. So the kickoff meeting is a step in your workflow.
Future state, yes.
Future state. Okay. So you're doing kickoff meetings now, but they're not captured in the digital workflow tool.
Correct. Yeah, it's not super formalized. Like we do sort of have that onboarding process in the workflow because we do track engagement letters that way since it needs to be
Right.
signed before work's being done. So I think it could just be an extension of that.
Right. Yeah. I haven't seen many firms successfully track kickoff meetings happening. So
Hmm.
I'm excited to see you doing that. That's really cool. Um, if that gets hung up at some point, then you could look at, engagement letter signed plus X number of days. That's when I've seen work
Yeah.
because when you get the engagement letter, that almost always triggers something somewhere in a workflow because now you're starting
Hmm.
something. So whether it's project number issued or whatever it is, T plus X number of days. And usually it can't be X plus 1 day because kickoff doesn't happen, the next day in most
Right.
cases, but you don't want it to be T plus 90
Hmm.
because if kickoff happened, 2 weeks in, you don't want to wait 2.5 months to ask about kickoff. So,
Yeah.
you know, some uh reasonable interim can work. What can happen, I know you're using the client feedback tool. What can happen with
Hmm.
that is on engagement letter signing, we can go ahead and schedule the survey, say 30 days out, and notify the sender, hey, this survey is scheduled on this date.
Hmm.
Click here if to change it to be, more timely. So you can
Right.
not make them do something, but you can give them the opportunity to refine it. So that's a workaround you could use if you don't actually have kickoff as a step in the workflow.
Yeah.
So Abby or Allison, if uh, have you thought through it all? Any kind of journey-based feedback where you're getting feedback during an engagement, or are you only looking right now at the kind of annual or semi-annual
Yeah.
relationship survey?
The one that I did was more what we've done in the past was more time-based versus
Yeah,
trigger-based. I would love to do where we had a new matter, new client, and then we could kind of at their first bill
yeah,
have that as a trigger. We're not there. Um, we usually what happens is we start with those top 200 clients just because those are the biggest at risk or the biggest value within the firm, I guess. And so, and that's where we're able to get buy-in for people. Um, I've worked in accounting firms, and they're different from law firms in that my experience at the law firm has been a lot more, we have to get buy-in versus top down, this is how we're doing it. And so the buy-in at the top 200 level we've found is we can kind of get them there, right? Just if we were to have any new client, I think it might be a little bit more challenging, but
Yeah. Well, for the purposes of this workshop,
yeah.
do you want to go through and plan how you would make that work, assuming you could get the buy-in? Oftentimes
Okay.
having a plan is part of getting the buy-in.
Yep.
Do you want to work through that, or
Yeah,
would
we can do
something else
that.
be helpful? All
Yeah.
right.
So the sender, if we were doing kind of an online survey, and we've only done online surveys twice, and they were
Yep.
kind of time-based, right, into the top clients. But the sender, I guess, would be from, hopefully, well, I'll tell you how we did it in the past. That in the past, we would have the relationship partner were in conversation, or just somehow they would communicate to their client that a survey would be on the
Yep.
way, and we would send it from the managing partner. The thought there in the past is we wanted to demonstrate that the level of importance for the survey is top down, right? That, our top leader has that importance. And then send, hopefully, I guess, but if we're doing it from this trigger, I guess it would come from the automated system, a CX system. And
So,
then,
yeah. So the sender is, who does the client think it's coming from?
right,
So is that going to come from the relationship attorney?
sure. Okay.
And then
And
the
then
question is,
would be
who
automated. Hopefully, that would be the goal, right?
Yep.
Because then we don't need them. Okay. To whom? I mean, usually it would be the general counsel or the legal decision maker.
Okay.
And then the trigger would be that first bill.
Yep.
And then trigger source would be that ERP, right? Or the billing system,
What billing system are you using?
3E.
A 3E?
Mhm.
Okay. Um, does that system have the relationship attorney?
Yes.
Does it have the billing contact that you're sending the bill to?
Yes.
Okay. Is there anything else that we need in order to get the survey out that might not be in 3E?
You know what? Actually, the 3E is usually who is receiving the bill. So that
Okay.
might be their accounts payable person. It might not be the decision maker. So it could be from
Gotcha.
our CRM, as to who kind of is the decision maker, right?
Right. So that becomes a possible complication in this plan. If you don't have the right recipient inside the billing system, then you either need to connect your CRM and the billing to make sure you're putting that into the billing,
Mhm.
or you're going to have to connect your CX platform to both sources and then combine the data that way.
Okay. Okay. And then accountability. Um, yeah, I think I'll go back. That CX reviews the data, shares with the relationship partner, and then the supporting business units.
Mhm.
So basically, yeah.
Right. So that's the process I wanted you guys to make sure you could get through when you really start thinking through, when are we going to measure? What are the pieces we need to know? And let's make sure we find those data gaps. So as we're building a plan, we've got the full scope of what we need to execute in order to make that happen. It's very common for there to be data in two systems that we need. in order to make the survey happen. And so then we have to figure out how do we get it all into one system so that it's streamlined. And I've seen a lot of programs stall in the launch phase because they didn't figure out all those little details. And so now you've got a plan, but then it takes a while to execute because we need to engage IT and a few other stakeholder groups to tie all that stuff together. All right. Well, guys, we went really quickly through this. Do you want to spend any more time figuring out how to lay out voice of client planning here? I've got a few more things to go through after this. I just want to make sure you've got this piece done enough. And want to try to build out any other survey moments, or do you want to move on?
What are some other like that just come to mind or that you've seen in the past, other than kind of time-based or onboarding or first bill? Where are some other kind of inflection points that you found would be helpful for us to consider?
Yeah. So if you have a forecast end date of the engagement or the matter, that can give you a mid-matter checkpoint. We talked about deliverables, so yeah, if there's a like firsthand experience, I sold Client Savvy, last April. I spent a lot of time collaborating with some attorneys, my counsel representing me through all of that. There were certainly some times um, when they gave me red lines on the buy-sell agreement, right? That was a moment, that was a deliverable. Um, and what was I feeling at that moment? Was I feeling overwhelmed? Was I feeling supported? Was it, you're asking me questions I don't know the answer to? Like, I need guidance, not questions, you know? That could have been one of those moments where I had some emotion. It would have been good to be able to share some feedback with. So, red lines on a document, is that tracked anywhere? If it's not tracked anywhere, we could put it on the aspirational list, but if it's not tracked anywhere, it's going to be hard to execute. Does that make sense? Um, I do a lot of work in design and construction. That's a very, phased and structured. You've got, a kickoff meeting, you've got your uh, a draft design, you've got your, a final design, you've got your constructability documents, you've got bidding, groundbreaking, all the way through the construction phase. So there's a lot of really clearly defined milestones there. Um, uh, some legal things definitely have those. If you're doing litigation, there's discovery and all those, very formal phases. Some legal is just you got a client who every now and then pops up and asks a question, right? Can you review this letter for me? And then it's done. So, um, um, one great way to source some of these critical moments of truth is to go talk to a handful of attorneys and ask them, when do you think our clients rapidly change emotional state? What things really matter to them? Where do we have big stuff that happens? That can be a really good source of inspiration for some of those CMOTs.
Okay.
Anybody else? All right. You guys are turning a 7-hour workshop into a 2-hour affair. So, some things to think about. This is kind of modeled after how we do things in our CX platform, but I'm sure whatever platform you're using, think about who administers this, who has access to see all the feedbacks. We have the, you know, we call them firm managers, but are there certain roles in the organization who need to see all the feedback? So usually executive leadership wants to see that, but marketing really should have access to that to be able to pull all of that together. If you have a director of operations or a director of quality, those are people that oftentimes have a valid reason to be able to see feedback across the whole organization. So really think through who needs to be able to get in and poke around and explore data to serve their needs. I encourage CX professionals not to become the bottleneck where everyone has to go through the CX person to get to the data. The more we can equip and train people to access the data and go ask their own questions of it, the more listening really starts to take root. Think about how you're going to organize this. You've got different practice areas, Allison, right? So each practice area, is there a director for each practice area? So your practice area manager might need to see all feedback in that practice area, but maybe they don't see feedback across the whole organization. So you really start thinking through, information organization and accessibility. Um, Allison, it sounds like, or Caitlin, you've got some people that are, more operational, like project managers. You've got some people that are relationship managers. So they could both be working on the same work for the same client, but they might both need to see it. One to manage the relationship, one to manage uh, the project operations. So you start thinking about those things as well. Any other questions about information design and organization? Um, we talked about the need to close feedback loops. So that means you probably want to have some kind of a real-time alert system. So, what alerts do firm managers get? You don't want them to get everything. Their inbox will get flooded. So what are we going to escalate up to them in terms of real-time alerts? Or are they going to get none at all and they're going to get a weekly or a monthly digest? So as you're planning your program, think through not just who has access to see, but what are we going to proactively push out to which people? Any questions around alerting and proactively engaging stakeholders with the feedback responses? And then think through your comms plan. So as you're either standing up a VoC program or as you're making changes to your VoC program, how are you going to introduce this to your staff? Who's doing it? Do you have a set of, is there a memo? Is there some piece of communication that you're going to send out to your staff to let them know what's happening? How do you introduce this to your clients? And don't just think about this as point in time. Hey, we're standing up a VoC, so we're going to tell you about it. Think about this as ongoing. Um, as we hire new staff, how do we tell them about our VoC program? As we bring on new clients, how do we tell them about our VoC program? So you've got your uh, uh, clients and staff that are in place when you launch, but you have to have a communications plan for new clients and new employees as well. Think through how you're going to monitor usage and make sure loops are getting closed, make sure, all the right clients are being included. It's really helpful to work with finance on this and get list of, a clients by billing. If you're doing a um, your milestone or in matter closeout surveys or something like that, that's not just the annual, you might need a monthly list of billings by client so you can look and see, are we missing any feedback from clients that have big units of work going on? One of the things I've seen firms do, Allison, that gets it doesn't quite get into journey based, but it gets away from the annual and splits the difference a little bit is every time we send an invoice over $10,000, we must have done something. So that can be a trigger point for a survey. And maybe if we did it 2 months in a row, only do it every other month. And that way we don't reach that survey fatigue threshold. And then make a plan. When is the first one going to go out? Like, how are we actually going to get this started? We're sitting here March 23rd. The first one's going to go out May 1st. We've got, 6 weeks between today and May 1st. And here's all the stuff we need to get in place in order to make sure that first one happens. Mhm.
You were saying before about onboarding new staff. That's one of
Yep.
the challenges we faced is we kind of rolled out what's called the Parker Poe Way, and we
Mhm.
rolled out the Parker Poe Way for people who were here at the time. But then we were talking about and we were doing journey maps, and we were talking about when do new people learn about the Parker Poe Way? How are they hearing about it? Is it in the onboarding process? Is it not? We're learning that it was not in the Parker in the process. So they're kind of hearing about it and they're like, what is this thing?
Yep.
Nobody's kind of given me the background on it.
Yep.
They heard the language, but they haven't heard the kind of the introduction or the beginning. So
Exactly
um,
right.
that was something that was unexpected that we've
Yep.
uncovered.
Um, so, um, as you're going through this, you're developing your critical moments of truth. We talked about, what are the themes you're gonna get feedback on. That ultimately now lets us know. So at kickoff, because we know who it's going to, under what context, everything else, we can now write a really tailored set of questions here, for onboarding, because we went through this process and got all the data. Now we're going to write the right questions. If you just sit down and write a onboarding set of questions without going through, like, really, how is this going to happen? You're probably not going to write the right set of questions. So hopefully what I've walked you guys through today is a framework for organizing your thoughts, creating an operational plan for listening to clients, and then helping you think through some of those things like communications, accountability, uh, data access, alerts, all the different ways to engage clients appropriately. So what other questions do you have? What else can I help you with in terms of standing up VoC?
I'm curious, can we see what the alerts checklist is?
Yep. Oh, yeah. Let's open that. Nope. You. All right, I think it's locked, so I think I need to unlock it. Let's see. Usually you just double click on these things and
Systems fighting you.
yeah, they obviously changed how I don't want to put a sticky note there. I want to open this thing. Okay, maybe I can just zoom in really close. Nope, that doesn't do it either. You can kind of almost read it. Oh, view. Why is it not letting me view? That is so weird. And it is still saying it's locked. Unlock object view. Mural must have changed something. You used to just be able to double click on these objects and they would open. So no, apparently that's fighting with me. It's got a case of the Mondays. Let's see. So this, if we unlock this, well, see, there's the slide deck. That's what should happen. You
Yeah.
should you should just be able to open it and see it. So there's your slide deck. I don't know why that is not letting me open. So I apologize.
Oh, good. I was just curious. I didn't, it gave us some ideas on other things that we should be thinking about.
Yeah, there's of course now everything is unlocked, so it's gonna move stuff. But yeah, the project group managers, they should get alerts if there's a score. Like, don't bug them with scores that are just below mid expectations, but
Mhm.
maybe bug them with alerts that are, two notches down. Let them know if there's
Okay.
a high or low NPS. Let them know if someone on their team isn't closing a follow-up in a timely manner, right? Because that's really about your accountability. So your group leaders, that's about accountability, escalating issues and driving accountability. Your project managers or account managers, alert them if there's a score below 3.5.
Okay.
Let them know if there's a comment added, because that, that comment might need a bit more of a human touch. You know, who whoever the survey sender is, they should be copied on everything in real time because they're the one who the client thinks asked. You don't want there to be any delay in the ask, the answer, and then the follow-up. So you start thinking through based on where they are in the organization, what alerts do we need to make sure they have? Now, it doesn't mean the survey sender gets 5 alerts. These are the 5 conditions that trigger an alert, and they'll get 1 alert. But these are the conditions that trigger, hey, Joe just responded to a survey and we've brought it to your attention.
Okay.
Is that making sense?
Yep.
So, and sometimes you've got a managing partner who might fill multiple roles. They might have their own clients that they work on directly. And so if the managing partner has some direct clients, she might get alerts when she was the survey sender, but gets no alerts for anybody else's. If she logs into your CX platform, she can see it all,
Okay.
but she's only getting alerts for her clients, not for everybody's clients. So when you really start thinking about a CX platform, it should allow that kind of flexibility of,
Mhm.
who needs to get what proactive pushes, which might be different than what they're allowed to see when they log into the system.
Okay.
If you have too many alerts, it becomes noise and then people ignore the alerts. So there's a bit of an art to getting the alerts just right.
Mhm.
What are the questions?
How often do you typically recommend to keep like a like provide updates to like management with kind of the survey results? Like I know it's important to kind of have them keep a pulse on things, but like how do you how do you recommend like approaching like how often like what is the approach like kind of advice in that range?
That's a great question, and I'm going to give you a slightly complex answer. The simple answer is give them the data when they want it. The way to increase how frequently they want it is by closely tying your VoC data to business outcomes. So, one firm we worked with, law firm, they found every detractor forecast $83,000 in lost billings the next year. So when you can start drawing a straight line from an NPS score to eroded billings, well, now all of a sudden, if we're getting, 15 detractors a month at $83,000 each, right, they were losing over $40 million a year in billings because of broken CX. So when you start elevating how CX ties directly to a number on a dashboard they look at monthly, they want to see that CX data on that dashboard at the same frequency of updates as their other business metrics. So the more closely you can link VoC data to business outcomes, the more frequently they're going to want to see, because VoC should be leading indicators for the business outcomes. If you aren't tying those things closely together, that's when, if you give it to them monthly, it kind of becomes a shrug of like, why am I looking at this? I don't really see how it connects to things. So that's where, maybe a quarterly update might be a little bit more relevant. So uh, don't try to push it more often than they're asking for, but make sure they're seeing it at least quarterly. That that's kind of my recommendation. If you're doing it like, one of our platinum award winners for the uh, uh, client experience award, their chief project officer. So he's in the, 5-person executive suite. He logs into the platform every day. That's the first thing he does every morning. He wants to see the data every day because they've also done some real correlations between how CX impacts a sales, capture, retention. They've got real dollars and cents. So in their case, every detractor forecast $136,000 in lost future client lifetime value.
Hmm.
Right? You start putting numbers like that on it, people pay attention. They want to see it often. So but you do that by connecting your CX data to the business case. Any other questions?
This is definitely a future state for us. So, but it was good to go through the exercise and think about those, where those triggers could be.
Well, we have an app for that, so when you get there, let me know. I'm more than happy to
Yep.
help. All right. Well, I'll give you guys 36 minutes back to your day unless you have any other questions or want to talk anymore.
No, this was awesome. Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Bye, everybody.
Hi, thank you.